Hello, I'm Sarah Bradbury from The Upcoming, and welcome to the latest episode of our podcast interview series. Today, I'm joined by Paul W.S. Anderson and Milla Jovovich, the creative and real-life duo behind some of the most iconic action films of the past 2 decades, including Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, and The Three Musketeers. We're going to be talking all things their latest collaboration, In the Lost Lands, visually stunning, genre-blending fantasy adventure, based on a story by George R.R. Martin, of course, the famed author of Game of Thrones. We're going to have a chance to talk about how they brought this surreal world to life, the enigmatic sorceress Grey Alice that Mina plays, alongside Dave Bautista, who is her gunslinging guide, and also about how their creative partnership continues to evolve. So let's get stuck in. Hi, both. I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Huge congratulations on the film. Maybe we can just begin with a brief intro to In the Lost Lands. For people who don't know anything about it, what on earth can they expect going in?
Well, it's the story about a witch named Grey Alice who gets asked to perform to grant someone's wish. To be able to do it, she needs to hire a hunter to help her kill a werewolf.
And they have to venture out into the Lost Lands on their mission. But as anyone will tell you, anyone who's read a fairy story, be careful what you wish for, especially when that fairy story has been written by George R.R. Martin, because it's probably...
And stars me.
It's probably not going to end well.
It's not going to make your wishes come true.
Obviously, George R.R. Martin, so famous now with the Games of Thrones, sort of exploded across the world. But I believe actually this sort of the talks about adapting, one of his short stories actually sort of predated all of that, if I'm right. So what was it about kind of his work that was really compelling to you? But also this particular story, why did you think this is one that's going to work well on the screen?
I loved it because what I felt George had written was an adult fairy tale. So it had this great message, be careful what you wish for. It kind of harkened back to the original fairy tales, the Hans Christian Andersen version of The Little Mermaid, where the Little Mermaid died, or the Brothers Grimm version of Cinderella, where toes got chopped off. It was a very George R.R. Martin take on a fairy tale. And that to me was something that was very, very striking. And I know for Milla also, she was attracted to the idea of like playing a magical creature, of playing a witch.
Well, I've always loved fantasy, and that was always, to date, my escape is, reading some random fantasy series with dragons or elves or something. So for me to be able to actually play like a mythological character is something that I always wanted to do. I think Game of Thrones had just kind of come out.
I had just worked with Kit Harington on my movie Pompeii at the urging of Milla, because Milla had already read all of the Game of Thrones books because she's a massive consumer of literature. She's like, yeah, cast Kit Harington, then we can ask him questions.
Yeah, so it had already become successful, but it was like the first wave, and we knew the Konstantin Werner, who had written the original script based on 3 short stories of George's that he had put together, and he had come to me with this film, and it never came together, as films often don't, but we remained friends. A couple of years later, we were talking, and I said, why don't we get this movie made, but like maybe let's focus on this one story that I love called In the Lost Lands. And I said, why don't we get Paul involved? And Konstantin was really on board with that. And then we started having conversations with Paul, and the two of you guys started doing like one of many, many, many iterations of a script rewrite.
Yeah, and that was a 7-year process, the whole thing, because obviously we made other movies in the meantime. And this is the first time that Milla's taken a full producing credit on any of the movies we've done together, because she really brought the whole thing together. She brought Konstantin Werner, who had the short story, and myself together. And Konstantin introduced me to George, and we met and had dinner and discussed it. And throughout the whole development process, Milla kind of pushed to...
I've had the reins, steering the crazy carriage with the horses. Horses are furious.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really pleased about in the development process is, Konstantin and I would come back with a rewrite. And Milla would go, well, the action's great, but where are the characters? Because obviously the short story was all about Grey Alice and Boyce. And Milla was determined that, we shouldn't lose sight of the real engine of the movie, which is the relationship between those two. So she made me work very, very hard, I have to say.
Well, Paul never likes putting me in love stories.
No, good Lord.
I mean, you're no stranger to kind of world building, but obviously if you only had a short story to start from, I guess there was a lot that you needed to add to it to kind of create this feature film. And I love how it's kind of got sort of quite a lot of different genre elements running through it. Like you said, like a really dark fairy tale. There's a twisted love story there. I know you were maybe partly influenced also by kind of, spaghetti westerns from the past.
So that was all organic to George's original short story. Those Western tropes, two characters going off on a mission into a hostile landscape where the two characters don't necessarily trust one another, but then kind of learn to respect one another or maybe betray one another. I mean, you could be talking about For a Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Two Mules for Sister Sarah there with the male-female component. So that was all organic to George's short story. And yes, we did build it out, but we built it out with elements that were familiar from George's world. The influence of the church, the kind of the schism between the church and the state and the politics there. We ran every draft of the script. Well, not the ones Milla hit us around the head with, but the ones we were happy with, past George as well, and he would have his input. So it wasn't like we were building it out without the input of George.
And yeah, I mean, for us, it was so important to be able to really take the essence of the short story and, take advantage of the fact that George's universe is so rich and it's so built within all of his stories anyway. But I mean, at the same time, we had to choose a direction for where this movie was going to go, because of course, you have a story that's like whatever, under 200 pages, and you need bad guys. You need a whole kind of universe to support.
Yeah, you need an antagonist. And
there wasn't that in the story. It was very much a very intimate kind of twisted love story, fairy tale. But Paul is really amazing, and Constantine as well, building like all of the universe of like the nitty gritty, like the logistics, like where are they from? What's the city like? Who's in control?
Like, how does the city work?
Yeah, how does it all work? Like,
where does the food come from in the city? Actually, if you
sanitation, like,
yeah, if you look at the helicopter shots over the city, there are fields out there that we put in, just in case anyone should ask. But we did it all with George because we wanted to build out a world that felt as defined and as complete as Westeros, but one that was completely different. I love world building, and to do it hand in hand with someone who's a master like George R.R. Martin was a gift, but also a great pressure, because at some point we knew we'd have to put the film in front of him and get thumbs up or thumbs down. And it was definitely the most stressed I've ever been in a theater was when I screened it for George in his own movie theater, which is why we're in Santa Fe right now, which is where George lives. He owns his own movie theater. People talk about the death of movie going. George is someone who actually put his money where his mouth is. He loves movies. And when his local theater closed, he bought it and reopened it and kind of like helps fund the whole thing. So we screened the movie for him there. And I was very stressed. I was sitting behind him going, my God, this is the most stressed I think I've ever been in a movie theater. And George has great comic timing. So he turned around at the end of the movie and he turns to me with this kind of face like thunder. And he goes, I loved it. But he left this long dramatic pause first. I'm like, ah.
I think
he said it's his favorite adaptation of his work.
It must be hard for you too, because I feel like you've written and I mean, of course, Resident Evil, like there was a video game world and stuff, but I mean, you've definitely always owned all of the worlds that you've built. In a sense, you've never had to like answer to somebody or impress somebody other than sort of yourself, So it must have been hard, like having to have like another writer breathing down your back, and having to actually be like, oh my God, this is the guy who wrote the story, and I'm taking it and I'm going to change like a lot of it, actually. Well, not change, but add like so much to it,
I don't think we changed anything really.
Yeah, no, like added.
It was a kind of additive process, and it was to make sure that the things we added felt organic to the world that he had created.
But you mean, I guess, taking on this role, because you've played so many incredible sort of action heroines, but so I wonder what you could kind of take from other roles you've done before, but how this one was maybe a bit different. I mean, she's a powerful figure, but she's cursed. There's a tragic nature to her. So how did you approach playing her, but also the dynamic that you have with Boyce, with Dave Bautista playing that role too?
I think it was such an interesting character because she's such a mystery. And, for me, it was very much like going back to my love of mythology growing up and fairy tales and reading about these characters that sort of have always been there, are present like within our world. But at the same time, like, they've been around as long as that river, or they've lived in the forest in that particular tree since the beginning of time. Like, there's these elements of the unknown that are just so beautiful. And at the same time, very lonely. I mean, if you imagine like, oh, I'm the spirit of the river and I've been here since the dawn of time, like, it's a very lonely existence, and that sort of immortal, like, what is it? What is immortality? Where does she come from? Why is she cursed? Like, how does she feel about all of this? I mean, that was like constant, and still to this day, I still ask myself so many questions about Grey Alice, and it was always on my mind, like, how did she get this curse? What is her history? What, was it always like this? Did she have a childhood? Like, there was all these things that always went through my head, and all these interesting questions. And, what I came back with was, in the end, everybody, no matter if you're mortal or immortal, I think the one thing that binds us is our need for companionship and our need to share our story with somebody, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel understood, and that's something that kind of bridges the gap between being mortal and being magical and whatever it is.
Yeah, and while it's a fantasy story, I think it does have great relevance to now, when people have so many ways, like social media, so many ways to have friends and have conversations, but yet there's an
You never end up talking.
There's an epidemic of loneliness. And that's in both Alice and Boyce. They're extraordinary characters, but they're both extraordinarily lonely as well.
And can you say a word about working with Dave? I think he's an actor that obviously comes from a complete different background in a way, but he's really forged a path in the movie world. And I think he continues to surprise people, So what was it like having him on set? I mean, obviously you must have such a shorthand with one another from working together so many times, but then it must be great bringing in new people into your circle.
We were so blessed to work with Dave because, I think for me especially, well, I mean, I'm sure for Paul too, but he's made a lot of movies with me. So, but I've made movies with like big stars. Some of them were lovely and some of them were not. When you have a presence on set, especially a set that's as challenging as in The Lost Lands was, physically, emotionally, for the crew, for everyone, just logistically, like a big ego coming around and sucking up life is really difficult. And it's not very welcome. Everybody just wants to make the best movie possible and do their job and actually get some rest too at the end of the day, rather than coming home with a bunch of trauma that someone's ego gave you, So Dave came in like a nice human, like a nice, normal human who was polite and well-mannered and chill and friendly and treated everyone with respect, and didn't matter who you were or who you weren't. He's just a lovely person that makes everyone feel comfortable. And that helps, I think, so much when it comes to like chemistry between people on set, because I think as an actor, especially, it's feeling vulnerable already because, for me, I'm coming in with this crazy wig and this crazy costume, and I'm like, the tattoos, and is it going to work? And, you have a person, an ego, and who's feeling threatened or whatever, that could have gone really badly, where they could have just looked like, oh, whatever, which, by the way, I've had on films before, and it makes you feel very uncomfortable and makes it very difficult to like go for it when you're trying new things or taking risks with a character. So Dave just made me feel like it was always a safe space around him. There was always this feeling that I could experiment, that I could try things, that we could improvise, that we could, do whatever. And I knew he wasn't judging me and he wasn't like out to get me, which
He's got an amazing aura of calmness about him. For a man he's a big guy and he's obviously capable of extreme physicality and action, but he's super calm and he's super chill. And having both him and Milla on set together really, for me, made it a dream because, there's that everything comes from the head, right? And the head of the movie is whoever the lead is and whoever the director is. If you have two leads like Milla and Dave, everything's golden because it just makes your work so much easier because everyone is feeling relaxed on set and they know that the two people who are on set, who are the leads of the movie, are just there for the movie to do the best possible work they can. And that's a dream.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Huge
Thank
congratulations
you.
on the film. Can't wait for everyone else to see it and also what you guys do next.
Awesome. Thank you.